Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, where we are exploring the pathways and practices that support you in living a life that is grounded, spacious, connected, and that help us all to remember ourselves. And we're doing this through conversations between a Reiki teacher and practitioners of a wide range of realms in healing, psychology, art, spirituality, magic, and many others, exploring the connections between these diverse practices to illuminate the healing patterns that humans have created throughout our entire existence. Thank you for joining us. We're really glad to have you along for these few steps of the journey. And if you've watched these episodes before, you know that I just am so tickled and enamored with having these conversations. I often get to meet people that I perhaps never would have come in contact with, learn about modalities I might have never learned about, and that is really exciting to me. But sometimes I get to connect or reconnect with somebody who is dear to me, somebody who is a friend, a colleague, somebody who perhaps I don't get to talk to nearly as often as I would like. And that is the case today. And I am so thrilled to invite my colleague, my friend, Yolanda Williams, into this space. Yolanda, welcome.
Thank you so much. As you're saying all that, I'm already fighting back the tears. Yeah, it's amazing that we finally have reconnected in this way. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yolanda and I, we don't get to connect as often as I would like, but when we do, it's always like the emotions are just right there at the top of the high heart, ready to
Yeah.
spill over. And, one of my hopes for this conversation is that we get to unpack that a little, right? What
Yes.
is this connection, right? I know lots and lots of Reiki practitioners, lots and lots of folks working in these realms, and I love and admire so many of them, but there's just something that's right on the surface whenever we have a conversation, and, some piece of that will spill over today, and I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to that. But to help us land in this space and to help invite in our viewers, our friends who are along with us, I'd love to just share a little bit, at least the on paper part of what I already know about you as a place to begin. So, friends, help me invite Yolanda. Yolanda, you are a teacher of energetic alchemy. You are an intuitive mentor. You're the host of Reiki Radio podcast. You're also a certified wellness counselor through Cornell University, using a blend of techniques to help clients and students to achieve deeper understanding of themselves. Your work facilitates new levels of self-connection and reveals the dynamics of our mind, our body, and our energy. You've also trained with internationally recognized Reiki Masters in lineages of Usui Reiki Ryoho and of Jikiden Reiki, and that's the context that I got to know you in. We share a
Yes.
teacher. And you've also trained with shamans and healers and various other modalities, increasing your intuitive abilities and exploration of transformative self-observation. Oh, what a phrase, transformative self-observation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your methods have helped Reiki practitioners globally, and you recently created an Oracle deck. I really look forward to sharing that with folks for seekers and practitioners of energetic alchemy. And I thank you for creating those resources.
Thank you.
So, friends watching, you should know that through her podcast, Reiki Radio, Yolanda shares tools to support your spiritual journey, including interviews with healers and authors who practice techniques from various traditions. Your classes include Usui Reiki Ryoho at all levels that take place in San Diego, as well as mentoring and intuitive awakening courses online. And her group virtual classes through the Alchemy Circle are open to practitioners at all levels and through any lineage. So lots of ways to be connected with all of that magic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hearing you say that, I was just thinking it has been several years since we've met, and I can't wait to have you come on my podcast as well, because there's so many things I want to know about how your practice has evolved
Yeah.
since that time of our meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were gracious enough to have me on, right after that first meeting, which I think was in 2019. Um, so much has changed since then. Uh,
Right.
and it's funny looking back at it. I was looking back at it at that time, and you see the progress that you've made in something when you look back on it. I think I did that interview in my bedroom. I didn't have my studio. So many changes. So I would love to come back on your podcast.
Yes, please.
Renew that in a way that feels a little bit more current. But
Yeah.
if any of y'all, want to see baby Michaela from 5 years ago when I was really just starting to do this work more publicly, I'll post that link down below, as well as ways that you can watch all of Yolanda's podcasts. So, but what I'd love to just start with, again, to continue dropping us into this space, into this time, is to just begin by asking how you're doing today. And just how are you? What are you bringing into this space? What feels like is on the top of your heart today?
Well, it's funny, you and I were talking a little bit right before this, and I told you I'm going through perimenopause because, almost 50. And today feels really good. And now, because of all of the shifts and changes that I'm witnessing in myself, the days that I feel completely aligned and my mind is clear and I'm fully awake, I appreciate beyond words. So today is one of those days.
Yay.
And I feel, yeah, I feel really good today. I feel alive today. But also to what we were speaking of, it feels like a definite recent energy shift. And I feel like not just inspired, but I just feel literally more alive is the best way I can say it. So I'm enjoying that, savoring it, and
Mhm.
we'll just ride this wave for now.
Yeah, I mean, as we were saying before we jumped on recording, we're in a similar place with that of noticing, firstly that ebb and flow of energy, both in our personal
Yeah.
lives and being, and in the world, and it's this odd combination of things being, fairly intense and challenging in the world right now. A lot of fear that's present in the world, a lot of stirring, a lot of what if, a lot of what's going to happen energy, and I feel that as well. And at the same time, there's a sense of like destagnation, and that's definitely happening in me. I've been in a bit of a stagnant is maybe too strong of a word, but something in the family of like too much stillness, too much slowness, too much
Right.
bogged down, maybe bogged down. Something about a bog happening in the past few months. Um, and so this feeling of like this influx of clean, clear water coming through that bog and kind of flushing it out. And I know that will shift, again, the ebb and the flow. I think maybe we're a little bit similar in that my energy comes in big cycles of rest and stillness, and then these kind of bursts of energy. And
Yeah.
I honor that. But when there's a correspondence between a lot of shifting energy in the world and feeling that inside of myself, it's something to pay attention to.
Yes.
And thinking about a biological phenomenon like perimenopause, which is for sure on my horizon, um, and the way that that can really focus our attention on the way that things change,
Yeah.
and the way that they can change in an instant, the way that things can shift inside and outside from one state to another quickly, that we have a certain amount of control over that, but also a certain amount of surrender inside of that. And then really, so then what do we pay attention to,
hmm
right?
I love what you say. A couple of things come to mind. One is the feeling sometimes of how I move into acceptance, say, of the times where I do feel more low energy or I don't feel as inspired or something feels like that bog or, just the stuckness. I like to lean into the idea that it's like not just a space of rejuvenation, but also maybe preparation for the burst that I know will come. So I used to be very resistant to it, frustrated with it. I would judge myself for the times where I felt, low energy or I didn't feel as productive because, there's a lot of cultural um, influence on that. Like, we have these ideas of busy, 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 and almost like it's a badge of honor, right? So I would really judge myself for times where I didn't feel like working from sunrise to sunset. And I really had to check that. I had to really stop and look at, what am I saying to myself? How am I being even, like verbally abusive to myself, quite frankly? I mean, I was being very hard on myself. And so when I was able to accept that, that shifted me into, well, what are these different experiences of energy? Where's the gift in them? What is it really about? And maybe I need to rest and recover, and maybe I need to allow whatever is happening for me in preparation that I don't consciously understand. So that has helped me a lot. The potential of all of these cycles serving their purpose. And yeah, it changes a lot too with talking to yourself differently.
I mean, that is so powerful and so true. And it's something that we maybe know is true, but really to
Right.
live through the experience of it. I mean, I've had such a similar I mean, still go through a similar experience of just dealing with a lot of shame
Yeah.
around being generally externally unproductive a lot of the time. Like,
Right.
it made it hard to be a good employee when I was working for other people. It's made it hard to be a good parent. It's made it hard to accomplish goals that I have.
Yeah.
And, by the time I was struggling to figure out how to run my own business and like maintain a practice that I was the only one really in charge of, it got, really intense as far as that judgment and that like verbal violence against myself around just what is a natural way of being.
Yeah.
And I was mentioning the business coach that I worked with, Micah from Women in Community. I have talked about that business training program before. It is magic. It is amazing. If you are a female identified woman entrepreneur who either works by yourself or with a small team, you're looking for some support around making your business functional and thrive, highly recommend them. I'll put their info down below. But she really helped me see, number one, how unkind I was being to myself around those topics. And
Right.
that was purely a reflection of our society's pathological obsession with productivity, how that's not the way every people group has related to productivity in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, the gifts inside of that cycle, right? Like what becomes possible when you naturally have long periods of self-reflection and reflection on the world and dreaming time and imagination time and time being in the question, right? Like that's a gift. It's a superpower, and it's something that we all have the capacity for in varying degrees, but like those of us who that's our natural state, what becomes possible. And shifting from being ashamed of that to being more self-responsible about it, because I can get into those periods of rest and just like fuck around on the internet, like not doing
Yeah.
much of anything. Or I can like, okay, this is my time to dream. This is my time to journal, to make art, to, just be with nature, to be in my practice, right? How am I using that time so that when that wave of energy comes, I'm prepared, right, to bring something forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. You also remind me of just the levels of criticism, right? Because not only did I have to acknowledge the judgment of myself as it comes to work and that level of productivity, but we really do it in every area. I mean, there was a period where I judged myself as a practitioner. I thought, looking at other people and the comparison thing and am I good enough? All of these types of things. I went through that cycle. We do it in relationship, we do it in all things. But even just that, the downtime, like what you're saying, I remember I would be kind of hard on myself about that. But I was like, I get a lot of joy out
Mm.
of those spaces where I can intentionally direct my mind to, I watch a lot of comedy. I love stand-up comedy and
I do.
anything that makes me laugh.
Yep.
So I was like, but this is such a gift to be able to make that time to intentionally direct my mind towards things that feel good, because we do spend a lot of time in our days, taking care of responsibilities and things that may not seem as joy filled. But, of course, that's a matter of perspective too,
Right.
But yeah, I listen, honey, the layers and the layers, like every facet of life, acknowledging where we may be critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, my kid and I have been watching these debate shows on YouTube. She's really interested in debates, like
Mm,
seeing different sides of the same issue and, finding her own place in it and then having those conversations with people who think differently. It's a
yeah.
fantastic skill to develop. So we've been enjoying watching these. And to, see in some of these conversations, like the subject of shaming people has come up in a number of different topics. And, to see people really defend that act of shaming somebody to try to inspire positive change in them
Uh,
and the way that they have shamed themselves to inspire positive change. And it's so fascinating to me because it's so different than my worldview about,
right.
that like to me, shame is like, where positive change goes to die, it's like
Yeah.
not gonna happen down in that muck. But anyway, that's an aside. But just, thinking about these ways of being that, that are so different from each other, but that's why we're meant to be in community, right? We're not meant to do everything
100%.
by ourselves. We're meant to have, interlocking connections with other people who are strong in those areas that we're not, and vice versa. Um, and yeah, leaning into community and leaning away from this myth that you're supposed to be 100% capable in all areas of your life at all times,
Yeah.
it has its own healing
Can I
capacity.
just say, this is what I love about the times when you and I get together because our conversations, like it can't be just, one particular thing. I love that we both, our minds just kind of weave in and out of all of these things. And you activate a lot of thoughts for me too, right? So even what you're saying about your daughter, I was like, well, that's incredible point of focus. But it also reminds me of how so many people parent through shaming. And I think that they think that they're inspiring their children when in fact they don't recognize the damage being done, which is a whole nother rabbit hole. But you also, with the community aspect, it made me think of how we have that phrase, it takes a village, but we often think of that for youth, but
Right.
that extends into our adulthood. I think it is incredibly important to recognize the village that supports to your growth, your self-reflection, that pushes your buttons, that loves you. And you and I had an opportunity to speak about a week ago, and we were talking about the passing and loss of dear friends. And that was one of the lessons of that grief cycle for me was recognizing because I had three friends pass away back to back. And what I recognized in all three was what they contributed to my life that I hadn't examined while they were living. And so it was just like this wow kind of moment for me. And it made me then intentionally look at the ways everyone who is present in my life right now, how they are contributing, how they are part of my village, what I appreciate about them, even the uncomfortable parts, right? So, yeah, I hope we start to look at that. It takes a village, even for adults.
I love that you said that because I've thought that before, and even when applied to parenting young children. Usually it's
Yeah,
restricted first of all to those baby that baby time when it's like
right.
undeniable that you could use a little bit of extra help during that time, right? Like that's one of the few little sparks of time that our culture's like, yeah, you probably could use some help. Um, and even then it's often used a little bit flippantly like, oh yeah, it takes a village, like but literally
Yeah.
it does. And as you're saying, that doesn't stop. And having the ability to have those times of reflection and really cast our attention on where are the gaps in my life that actually get so fulfilled in community. And then oftentimes we see the challenges of that because there's always challenges in bringing other people into our lives. But how does that actually make it all function? And that's like really in my face right now because we're building a live space for a dear friend of mine to live here. Well, they're actually already living here, but my mother is moving in, and so we need some extra live space. We've ended up with this very intergenerational kind of communal living situation.
Wow.
It's a shock to me. That was never something I was seeking, but here it is. And trying to do it all ourselves. We're very DIY people. We don't have a lot of money. We got a lot more time than money. We're very resourceful. We're very capable of, sourcing things and putting things together ourselves. But there's aspects of this project that we cannot achieve on our
Yeah.
own. We cannot source the materials. We cannot get the thing up there 12 feet, without help. And we had like a barn raising the other day, and had a group of friends who just were willing to come over and drink basil tea with us and put the walls up.
Yeah.
And it reminded me, even using that phrase, barn raising, which is it's an old timey phrase, but it's like, but aren't there still times in our life when we literally need a whole big group of friends to come
Right.
and help us just do a thing to accomplish in our life, and then be willing to show up for them? And it's humbling to be like, we actually couldn't accomplish this without you, and it blows my mind that you're willing to spend the time. But then
Yes.
like, but of course you are, because I will spend the time when you need it as well.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I keep fantasizing about, and I know that I just need to put in more effort. I think a lot about how much our connections shift and change as we grow, right? Because when we're young, we have all the time in the world to spend with our friends. As young adults, we spend a lot of time exploring life together. And then adulting happens, right? And everyone has their family and job and responsibilities. And as friends and community, we often say how much we mean to stay in touch, and we don't. However, we do know, like even with my friends that I've had for years, I know if I needed them, they would be there and vice versa. But I do long for that time and space where we could not need each other and still make time anyway. So I love like even hearing you say now you're in this kind of communal living space. That sounds like magic to me,
Mm.
because I think that's one of the downfalls, I guess, of the way we are culturally in adulthood, that we tend to lose a lot of connections or just don't prioritize them, but they're so nourishing for us. And there's nothing better. I'll show you the embarrassing picture. So this morning, my very first best friend from like kindergarten
Mm.
in Boston, I grew up in Boston, and she sent me a picture today of us in 2 different years of Halloween. When I tell you the embarrassing, I'm like, did my mom not like me? Like, what? Her costumes were incredible. Her mom made hers. It was like Rainbow Bright one year, and what's the other one? Princess Leia.
Oh man.
I, on the other hand, I'm like, Mom, I sent it to my mom. I was like, Mom, did you not want to be a parent? Like, why would you do this to me? Like, this was horrible. But anyway, it made me very, just reminiscent of those childhood times where everything was playful and there was nothing better than when you got to go outside and just be with a friend, not because something was wrong. It was just to enjoy community, right?
Yeah.
So I really fantasize about that in my adulthood a lot. I fantasize about having a dinner party. Why don't I plan it? You know what I mean? I do. I'm like, I want to have a dinner party and invite everyone I love, and it's going to be great. That has been in my head for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
I yeah, first of all, friends, maybe I'll get Yolanda to agree to let me put one of the pictures up. And if she does, I will put up a childhood picture of myself in a Batman costume. Okay? So maybe it'll happen. So yeah, this piece around, like, so something that was coming to me was like, most of us no longer like live in the same town our whole life, like with the
right.
same group of people. So this expectation that used to be commonplace, that we would just kind of be around the same people most of our life,
Yeah.
is not most folks' reality, I think. I mean, there's certainly that experience, but at least not, let me speak for myself. It's not been my community's experience. Many of us are very, are coming from somewhere else. You came from Boston, you're in Southern California. I haven't moved that far away, but a lot of my community has shifted. And I remember just like reeling from like the pain of loss when people would move away.
Yeah.
When you feel like, oh, this friendship's going to be forever, or this community is so stable, and then it isn't. And I'm just kind of thinking in this moment the way that in periods of my life has really inhibited my willingness to build deeper relationships, wanting to avoid that. I mean, I had a best friend for 7 years. I was like, we're going to grow old together. We're going to be old cackling witches around the cauldron, like when we're
Yeah.
90 years old. And she had life circumstances that caused her to break her friendships and move on. And it was like, it was devastating. I'm just like, how could this be? And it caused me to hold back on friendships. And I think one of the things that I'm more at peace with is that, and partly because I've built more skills in building community and there's more capacity to hold on to community over distance. So I'm noticing a bit of softening in the willingness to let things change and the willingness and the ability to see that if things change, it'll be sad. I have two very dear friends who are going through, breakups and like who knows what that's going to mean. One of my oldest friends just moved from the Bay Area, an hour away from me, up to Seattle, so many hours away from me. But that doesn't mean that I don't still get to have community and
Right.
that the capacity to build community, even if it's fluid, is worthy and necessary, even if the configuration changes and there's pain associated with that. And to kind of circle it back a little bit to, Reiki and our practice, and I love that we're just like, let's just talk about life. Practicing Reiki has absolutely given me that greater capacity to be with the discomfort of all of that. This is a topic that's been up so powerfully, and I think it's so important given just the uncertainty of the world, but the way in which we have got to be able to function and even thrive and stay present and stay in whatever the situation is, even when it's incredibly uncomfortable. And that desire to retain comfort and to then therefore kind of check out from the situations that make us uncomfortable or to avoid them, to not take risks, to not form connections, to not have the difficult conversations that need to be had interpersonally or in society. So much of that is made really quite toxic when we can't stay clear and present in the presence of incredible discomfort.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that the practice of energetic alchemy might have something to do with that, among many other things. And so I'd love to just invite you to share what that phrase means to you. When you say you're a teacher of energetic alchemy, what can we learn from you in that?
Yeah. Well, can I just weave in for you how I've bounced around? Because it's funny enough. I say that energetic alchemy and Reiki, these practices, I've studied many traditions outside of Reiki as well, but that curiosity has been such a big part of my life, even as a child. And the reason is because I'm originally from DC. I was born in Washington, DC. All of my family is in DC and Maryland. And my father passed away when I was 2. My mom is the youngest of 8, blah, blah, blah. She wanted to get away from her older sisters, always bossing her around type of thing, right? So when I was 5, she literally said, point on a map, and I pointed to Oklahoma of all places. And so we moved to Oklahoma for a time. So
Wow.
the first half of my kindergarten, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then she got a job opportunity in Massachusetts, which is why I ended up moving there. And then when I was 13, she got a job opportunity in California. So I moved over there. But I say all that to say, at a very young age, between, from the time I was born to my early teens, I was changing environments a lot. And it was shockingly different in every environment. So, like, until I was 5, I was always around my family. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and also the cultural differences, because DC at that time, which is very different now, DC at that time was primarily Black. And my mom um, worked with someone who was white. And she said the first time I met them, I asked her why they were clear, because I had never seen anyone white before like that. And then we moved to Massachusetts, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was primarily Italians. And like, I was the only Black kid in my elementary school for a long time, right? So I not only moved and lived in very different places, but culturally these places were so different. And what happened was when I moved to Boston, the accent is gone now, but that was intentional. I've had it. It was, well, a very strong Boston accent. But when I lived there, I my difference was always pointed out. Like, why is my hair different? Your skin is different. All the, so I became hyper aware that to everyone around me, no matter where I was different. And then every summer I would go back to DC. And because I had an accent and I didn't speak like my family, they pointed out my difference, right? So in no environment was I ever just chilling. Like it was always, why do you look like this? Or why do you talk like this? Or why, right? I always say, I don't know how I didn't go insane. However, it made me so curious about people because even at a young age, I understood people are always looking and projecting and coming up with stories and ideas of who I am, but they have no idea of who I am. So it made me very curious, and it at a young age helped me understand if I look at someone, I have no idea who they are. But this also created the sensitivity where I was very, like, so hyper aware of people's projections that I started not liking to be around people or groups of people. So then we moved to California. Again, totally different culturally, which it was a more diverse environment, moving to San Diego, but still just very different. But I still had this sensitivity of like I would get very uncomfortable around people, environments, all of these things. I mean, the high school I went to, there were like swastikas there's a lot of skinheads in Southern California, which a lot of people don't know. Anyway, they vandalized my car. It was a thing, right? So I've always been like hyper aware, hyper alert. And as a young person, you don't really understand that. So I was always the one, like, my friends would be like, you know, I was like the weird friend. Like, why don't you want to be in this environment? Why don't you really like these people? But I was going off of feeling. But a lot of the feeling was also based on my experience and my history. So I was just very protective of myself.
Yeah.
So fast forward to like 32 or 33. I was working in finance at the time, got laid off, was really, well, at first I was happy, but then realized life, I have bills and I don't want to go back into this realm. And an astrologer is who recommended Reiki and meditation. So I started taking classes, and it was fascinating to me, this different way of observing myself. So I started to then unlock and understand a lot of my behaviors and patterns. It wasn't just that I didn't like being around people. There was a reason of why I developed this sensitivity and this discomfort of being in certain spaces. And then going deeper into these practices of energetic alchemy, I started to recognize I wasn't always functioning from my own energy. A lot of times I was feeling the projections. So Reiki gave me one of the greatest gifts of recognizing how to manage my own energy, how to be very aware of my own processes of thought, and how all of that was affecting my personal environment, let alone the environments I went into. So Reiki, again, my mind was blown, went down a rabbit hole, studied all kinds of things, including magic, as you mentioned in the intro. And the whole point of it was I was curious about us. So I also, because I was practicing so many things, I was like, I'm not just a practitioner of Reiki. I didn't want to put myself in that box. I was like, really, what I'm fascinated with is our capacity, what we're capable of that we are unaware of. And it all has to do with this transformation of our own energy, which ties into the nature of our mind, the nature of our emotions, the nature of our experiences. It's all interwoven. So, energetic alchemy to me is that full picture of how we allow transformation of mind, body, energy, but first in being in relationship to it. So, there's this examination, just like an alchemist, right? Looking at even the base metal and not looking at any aspect of ourself as bad. I don't regret. I'm thankful for the life that I had. I think it contributed to why I'm an open-minded person, so to speak. But I look at these different aspects of life, relationships, experiences, what we would categorize as good and bad. And I'm just like, ooh, the study of them. How did this shape me? How did this mold me? How did this feed into my story? Ooh, ooh, ooh. And then we bring in the alchemy of love and compassion and seeing things differently. And when I started to recognize that, just the way I would see things started to shift the way I felt in my body. I became very aware of when I'm carrying tension in my body, where a thought would cause me to tense versus feeling relaxed in my body, changed the game. So that's why the last, I guess, almost 15 years now of my life have been completely dedicated to this, because I was suffering in ways I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And I think in our human experiences, many of us do. And so if there's anything that I can share that has genuinely helped me on my path, heck yeah. I mean, listen, I feel thankful to be able to share any of it in any capacity.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a lot. Did I answer your question? I'm
You
sorry.
did. You did. You also answered the other question I usually ask that hadn't, which is what are the threads of your life
Yeah.
that are, that you're aware of in this moment that have led you to where you are. So thank you for weaving all of that together so
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah.
And there is, of course, so much in there. But I really wanted to start with appreciating the way that you named your practice and the way that, because you have named it something that felt organic to you, that it becomes this container that can hold the very specific practices that you have studied in and allows each of them to be themselves
Yes.
inside of a container that's reflecting yourself.
Right.
I have so much respect for that, because one of the things that I really struggle with, as a white American in 2024 practicing a Japanese practice that's rooted in ancient practices that come through Japan and through India and through China, obviously fairly removed from my personal lineage. I've always really advocated for practitioners of Reiki and of other practices to really understand the practice for what it is and to allow it to be itself, and to resist kind of altering that practice based on our own self. But then we still get to be ourselves, right? So then how do we bring our own personal lineage and our experiences and the things that matter to us that are different from that lineage and other lineages that we've studied? And you're providing a really, I think, instructive model for that, right?
Right.
And allowing each piece, and I know this to be true about you. I'm not making that up. Allowing each piece to be itself and to be rooted in its own origins,
Right.
and then naming the container something that's you, that's of your origins,
Yes.
and then being really clear with people about how these things alchemize together
Yeah.
into this outcome that you're focused on. So I think that's so elegant and such a beautiful solution to something that you know can be challenging to solve, and if a person even thinks about it as a something that has to be solved to begin with. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that very much. Yeah.
It's interesting, listening to you even say that. I don't know why I'm so reflective. Maybe because my friend texted me this morning those horrible Halloween pictures. But what I just shared with you, I've never said, not even on my own podcast, but it also brings in that whole thing of, like, we hear a lot about cultural appropriation. And I know that, Reiki has become so popular globally. And to a lot of us, depending on the teachers we've had and the lineages that we've studied in, there is an enormous respect for where it came from, and understanding that that is an important part of even understanding the lens of the practice and the system as much as we can. I mean, of course, Japan 1922, like, not only the cultural difference, but the difference of that time, 1922, my gosh, right? Over 100 years ago. So I am thankful that I've had teachers that really even make that a highlight or a point of focus that we do still recognize to have this reverence and appreciation for the culture that it was born out of. But the appreciation part for me has always been important. This is why. I hope no one gets mad in your comments about this, but it's just
I
what's
mean,
true for me.
it'll drive the algorithm.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Feel
listen,
free, blow it up.
if
Blow
you
it
do,
up.
it's okay. But sometimes when I see, because I think as a culture, a lot of times we'll grab onto a lot of things and kind of blow it out of proportion, like go to the extreme of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people are accused of cultural appropriation when in fact it really is a deep appreciation for whatever it is they are feeling drawn to, curious about. They really do appreciate and love it. And again, from the way that I grew up, like I said, I mean, I grew up with the friend that texted me this morning. Her grandparents were immigrants from Italy, and they lived in the house behind her, and we would go visit her Nini and Poppy, and they didn't even speak English. Okay. And I loved being immersed in her family and having like real authentic Italian food and this and this. And because I've loved Italian food throughout my life and bad attempts at trying to recreate it, I'm not at all appropriating. Like, I genuinely appreciate not just the culture, but the family of my best friend. And I had Chinese babysitters who, again, the youngest was my friend, and her parents were also, they had immigrated from China, didn't speak it. So I was immersed in that culture. And like, still to this day, every Chinese or Lunar New Year, actually, I give red envelopes to people who are close to, not appropriate. This is connected to my childhood and something I appreciate, right? So I really hope that more widespread, we get a little more accepting of the fact that a lot of people genuinely appreciate being able to learn from different cultures and maybe just appreciate whatever elements that they're exposed to. And now with the world we live in and with technology, we have far more exposure than we ever had before.
Yeah.
So I hope that this idea of someone appreciating or being fascinated by something else outside of their culture, that it doesn't become so rigid that it makes people afraid to learn about other cultures.
I so appreciate the subtlety of this. This is a conversation that I circle around in a lot of ways, and I've personally been in a lot of different places with respect to what you're speaking to. I mean, I grew up in Berkeley, right? Like, the amount of cultural appropriation that I have been raised with is staggering when I think about it, and the amount of cultural appreciation.
Yeah.
And those terms, are a bit fluid in how they can be defined. Like, we kind of come to them with our own experiences. But, there is, I think, a distinction that can be pretty universally made between those two things. And to me, it comes down to, in terms of the culture that you're engaging with, in whatever way you're engaging with it, do you have any kind of personal relationship with it at all? And have you spent the time to understand what it is you're engaging with to any degree?
Right.
And then, of course, there's layers of intention, right? I mean, so like, there's times when people will take on a cultural aspect from somebody else in a way that's clearly about mocking that culture, or,
Yes.
and so we're not even like, that's not even in this
No.
conversation.
No.
That's clearly just no.
100%.
Right? So we're talking about the more subtle places.
Yes.
Where we really do have to kind of have our own relationship with the question. We have to know what our values and our ethics are around it, and do our best to live into that. And when we know that we're in integrity, because we know, you described some really beautiful points of connection with two specific cultures from your childhood, that you have that connection.
Right.
I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood with people very, very different from me. I know I have that connection.
Yeah.
There are times when I will censor how I engage in that culture, because I know how it might be perceived to someone who looks like me to go into a certain form of Oakland dialect, for example.
Right.
And then there's times that I don't. There are times that I'm like, but this is the dialect I was raised with.
Right.
I spoke as a child,
Yeah.
And so having, some discernment there. But ultimately, coming to that place of, do I feel an integrity inside of myself with this? And if the answer is yes, then other people's opinions get to be what they are,
Mhm.
and if the interaction is such where they're gonna tell us those opinions, then we can have that conversation, and we might still differ widely about how we interpret it. But again, if we feel that we're in good integrity, then other people's opinions get to be what they are. I mean, I had
Right.
this whole conversation with myself when I got this tattoo of Furomyo on my arm. I'm like, okay, I'm another Berkeley white girl with a Buddhist deity tattooed on me, right? Like I have known people who have, Buddhist deities tattooed on them, could not tell you their name, like
Yeah, yeah.
could not tell you who that is or what they mean or anything about it. They're like, it was a cool picture. I wanted to get it on me. To me, that's not in great integrity. Um, and so I had to I'm like, I know that Furo and I have a relationship. We went through the depths of COVID together. Like this is like we have a relationship, and he's there like in a prominent place on my left arm because I need to be able to bring him to my heart whenever I need him.
Oh, uh-huh.
That's why he's there, but it's also this very prominent place. So, I had to kind of have that conversation with myself. Like, you're not going to be able to explain that to everybody who will see that tattoo. So I have to be okay with people having whatever thought they have about the fact that I have this tattoo. Um, and I'm in a good place about that. But to be able to talk about these distinctions that you're making, is so valuable because, on the one hand, there's certainly folks who don't care about this at all, or like, whatever, if I like it, I'm going to do it. I don't
Right.
know anything about it. There's other people, and I have absolutely been in this other camp, who get so paralyzed around the thought of insulting somebody or being appropriative, or falling on the wrong side of that line between appreciation and appropriation, that I
Right.
disengaged from things that felt important to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, is like, if we discourage cultural exchange and conversation and engagement and appreciation and joy, you spoke to joy earlier. If we disengage from the ability to just take joy in each other, because we're afraid that we will be embodying a history of violence and oppression by taking that joy, then we're not, like, there's less healing that's happening in that. Um,
Well, this is such a big, beautiful thing of what you're saying, because I feel like that's a big part of our problem is that we don't, not only that we create these boundaries and lines of almost like don't cross over into exploring other cultures, but how can we have understanding, and how can we, it reminds me on one hand about Reiki, like dropping the our self-created identities and labels and roles and these things, and underneath it all at the core we are all of the same source intelligence, right? And if we were able to reconnect to that, there would be a lot of this that wouldn't even really matter to us. There would be just more of an appreciation from that lens. But you bring up a good thing of interesting thing, I would say, with in the realm of spirituality. So again, Reiki and meditation were my introduction, and I studied a lot of things. Now, what was popular, and I think even probably still, there was a lot of popularity around even traditions that come out of Hinduism, like even looking at chakras, even like deities that come out of, very specific deities out of very specific cultures and all of these different things. But I didn't see a lot of exposure to African practices and deities in these things, right? Which is interesting. Being a Black American, I'm like, wow, I'm practicing stuff from all over the world and nothing is right. Where's the African stuff? So, um, unintentionally, it just so happened I was in meditation one day and I heard Olu. I kept hearing Olu, Olu. And I was like, what is this? It was distracting me. And
mm,
so finally, when I came out of meditation, I Googled, and Olu is actually a short version of a name of a deity in um, some African traditions. So, there's this pantheon of, some call them Orishas, some call them Luas. It depends on whatever. So, in kind of going down the rabbit hole, what I found was there were so many deep, rich spiritual practices from the African traditions that actually even came over into not just the slaves that were brought to America, but South America and all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And because of how much fear has been wrapped around these practices from like Hollywood, movies, stories, religion, all of these things have demonized these practices and these ideas that a lot of us wouldn't touch it if you tried to pay us to, right? And so it was very interesting doing that whole deep dive, this whole exploration around that. Even stories of how in South America, to keep these practices in connection to their deities alive, a lot of them would swap them out with um, figures from Christianity to look like or be a replacement of a deity that was from their cult. I mean, just all of it was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then aside from that, seeing how in this realm a lot of people are feeling drawn to really explore what were the spiritual practices of their lineages, and what were the practices of their ancestors. It's all incredible, but interestingly, when we all go back in our history, it all again points to the same thing, and how in the different cultures you have different deities by different names, but they're all very similar, all have a deep connection to earth, reverence for earth, practices that connect us to our relationship to earth intelligence. I mean, so much you learn through spirituality, even just about our history.
There's oh, so good. Uh, so in the traditions that we get to play with when working with Reiki, from its origins, we work with a lot of Buddhist thought. And so the concept of non-duality has been one that I've really been working with a lot and trying to really understand what that means in daily life and inside of my mind and in our relationships. And there's something that you're speaking to that on the surface might seem dualistic, that might seem opposite, but there's such joy and value in actually making room for all of it to be true at the same time.
Yes.
And this is this idea of, again, what do we pay attention to? Paying attention to the things that are the same, that are inherently like fundamental about what humanity has noticed and therefore, you know, codified and told stories about and made imagery about, and the distinctions, right? This particularity in those stories based on the time and place that they're from. And that we can and must like hold space for both of those. And that's why, this podcast is called Reiki Crossroads and Connections. Like the point is to find those points that are these like spontaneous repeated themes and patterns that show up over and over again. You mentioned love and passion. Like, what spiritual tradition like doesn't have something to say about compassion as a driving
Yeah.
force of alchemy and of energy in our life?
Right.
And what lineage, what people group, if you go back far enough, doesn't have earth-based traditions
Right.
and understandings and stories and imagery that come from our direct experience with the natural world? We all have that. And
Yes.
the language that gets used is repeated, and the things we observe get repeated. And then there's also things that are very specific about,
Yeah.
people who explore that connection in a desert place are going to talk about it differently than people who
Yes.
explore it in a jungle.
Right.
And so allowing for both the commonality and letting that be the center, right? Like
Yeah.
fundamentally, humans are built more or less the same, and therefore we notice things and we're impacted by things and we feel things more or less the same. And so we're going to emphasize things and try to understand things in ways that are very similar.
Mhm.
And there's going to be things that are particular. And when you notice a trend like what you noticed, that in our particular modern culture, we're going to celebrate and center imagery and stories from some parts of the world and not others, there's a question there. Why is that so? Right. And I started noticing this when I, was putting together this studio. Is like I would go to a metaphysical shop looking for, imagery. I could find Kuan Yin statues. I could find Mother Mary statues. I could find imagery from East Asia, and I could find imagery from Christianity. But even inside of European traditions, I couldn't find Celtic deities that were
Mm-hmm.
from my lineage, and I certainly wasn't seeing African deities unless I
Right.
was explicitly going to a place that, which there's value in that. But if, you know, if there's a source that's saying, here is a range of imagery that's intended to stir your soul around spirituality and have you connect with the story, why are we only seeing a couple of cultures represented there? And I was, I'll make another plug for the School for the Great Turning. I recently did a class with Lydia Hartulian, who runs that school. And the class was called Tending the Bones. And it was, in general, focused on teaching us to trace our own ancestry, our own lineage through the lens of story and of song. And she taught it with Leah Song, who's one of the founding members of the band Rising Appalachia. It's one of my favorites. And it was a fantastic experience, so rich, so amazing. Highly recommend. We'll put the link down below. But she spoke to this dynamic. You know, she spoke to like this class. You know, is about rooting back into who we are, right, and finding those threads of our own lineage that got lost for lots of reasons, depending on who we're talking about.
Right.
And at the same time, finding those points of connection, right? It was all about letting both of those things be true, and that the more we can really love and appreciate and express and tell the stories and sing the songs of our own people, the more readily we can connect those with those of other people. And she made this
Yeah.
exact same point, right? Why can we find the stories and the songs and the imagery of, you know, in abundance from some parts of the world, and just absolute absence from so many other parts of the world? And what does that do to our collective perception about which stories matter and
Mhm.
which people groups have something to say about our human experience?
Right.
And so, you know, that is what it is, but each of us, we can know that and we can dig a little bit deeper, right? Somebody's making art, you know,
Yeah.
showing the mermaids of the Yoruba people. Like
Right.
somebody's
Yes.
making art, you know, showing
Yes.
the like deep dive Celtic deities that like
Right.
Christianity erased in that part of the world. And that erasure of like swapping out, you know, a stronger, more powerful cultural representation for those that it gets imprinted upon is, you know, it's a great wound that many
Uh,
of us carry. But it's not one that we have to accept,
no.
you know.
This is, I mean, you really make my mind go like 500 different places. This is again why I love talking to you. So there's three things I have to say to that you brought up. One is that was one of the things that really struck me in studying and deep diving in the more African-based traditions and religions. I mean, it seems like it would have been so obvious, but really to look at the fact of during the slave trade and trying to disconnect people entirely from their identity, their strength, their connection to what they believed in, their religion and all. And we know about how, even through colonization, how Christianity was like forced on so many cultures around the world in so many ways. But interestingly, to your point, this is why I really can appreciate, like, I think of them as the lineage heal or holders, people who, and this comes up a lot in the community of Reiki, right? Because you have on one side people who are very rigid about keeping as close to tradition as possible, don't color outside of those lines. But the beauty in that is that we all then still have access to as close to the history and the purity of the practice, the intent as we can possibly come. So I am beyond thankful, even though I'm a little more divergent, I'm thankful that there are these people who make sure that history isn't lost and that, you know, we can learn from the purest aspects of these practices as possible. But then on the other side of the fence, that's what initiated my curiosity of starting to recognize all of these cultures, all of these traditions, all of these stories. Again, they point back to the same essence of us awakening and recognizing and realizing our connection to all there is. What? It's like, are you kidding me? And the fact that all of these cultural traditions and practices are older even than modern religion, And a lot of the stories of religion, then you see these stories are reflecting the stories from these older culture. I mean, it blows your mind.
It
And
is.
my whole thing is like, I don't get attached to any of it as much as I'm fascinated of what they're all pointing to.
Right.
So that is really what I want to understand. And if I can learn it from a system that comes from Japan, if I can learn it through the study of a system that comes from Africa, China, I don't care where. If it's all pointing to what it means for me to be a human, but at the highest capacity of that I can attempt to achieve, I appreciate it. And I'm going to read it, I'm going to study it, and I'm going to get what I can from it. Another just little side note when you said Appalachian, have you ever met anyone who is Melungeon?
No.
Okay. So I just gotta tell you this really quick. Look at how old this was. This was at Blockbuster video store.
Hmm. Relatable. R.I.P. Blockbuster.
Listen, yeah, I'm on kids, Google it. So I was I was
No,
at
they laugh at it
Blockbuster.
about it. They know about Blockbuster.
Yeah. This was like the last year of Blockbuster though. This is when like VHS was on its way out. And there was this guy that worked there. He looked like, I guess, maybe from what we know, you would have categorized him as being looking kind of Irish, but not really. Like his skin was more olive,
Hmm.
but he had very red hair and like ringlet curls. And he just had an interesting look. And I happened to ask him what his cultural background was, and he told me he was Melungeon. Never heard of it, but it stems from people who come from the Appalachian area of the mountains, and look it up. It was fascinating. I never had
Oh,
heard of it before.
I love
Melungeon.
it. Election. I
Yes.
love it. Yeah, I mean, I love this. Again, back to the idea that we need, like, we're interlocking puzzle pieces, right? We need each
Yeah.
other. We need each other to be different, and like speaking to like those researchers and those folks who really have the capacity and the desire and the values framework to, study a thing, whether it's their own culture or somebody else's, and to
Yeah.
really preserve it as well as possible. In as much as possible, we can know the original form, understanding that even original form is a very fluid concept. I mean, I just spoke of my Celtic ancestry. There was a time when the Celtic world expanded into Morocco, like it, was all the way
Oh,
from the
wow.
British Isles into North Africa. And so, the bagpipes comes from Middle Eastern, you know, instruments. Um, but so the humanity moves. Right? We started with the story of, you moving all over the United States.
Yeah.
Humanity moves, and
Right.
pick things up that we like and that are useful to us, and we take them with us.
Yeah.
And we share them and we trade them. And, so it's like there's something very human in that exchange and that appreciation.
Yes.
And there's, especially when you blend in the types of power dynamics, when you're talking about colonization, right? There's a certain violence in the erasure of things. And so those, we need those folks who are going to, like, as well as I can possibly muster it, this is the thing. This is what it is. This is how it is. This is it in its
Yeah.
clear form. And then those who can, like, acknowledge that and know that and say, I understand what that is. And then I bring these other things. And so let's see what gets alchemized in that combination of things.
Hmm.
And Leah Song in this class talked about that because she and her sister, who are rising Appalachia, their whole family are music historians, and they've gone all over the world, like, studying in a, cultural anthropology way, music and story from all over the world, but in particular from the Appalachians in the United States. And then they make amazing music. And, she was like, I need those people who have that essence that I can learn and I can take
Right.
it. My music is never going to be precisely that thing. I'm not going to duplicate that music from the 1930s Appalachia, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna understand it super well, and I'm gonna blend it in, with these other things that I understand super well that reflect my own movement around the world and make something new. And
Mhm.
that's so human, like that's so reflective. And, back to that, just, is it cultural appropriation or appreciation? How well do you know the thing that you're blending? How do
Right.
you have a relationship with it? Have you earned it? Right?
Yeah.
In some way, right? And earned
Yeah.
subjective, like a lot of ways that that can be the case. But I just loved that so much, and you know, and again appreciating the people who can duplicate a thing as clear as possible, and then the people who can innovate a thing based on that relationship, I think is such an important non-dualistic space to appreciate humanity inside of.
Well, I think that's a big thing that well, coming back to Reiki, right? What it helped for me was one, by working on myself and applying the practices, I came out of the story that I was introverted and like antisocial and all of these things, which has changed my life in phenomenal ways. But because Reiki has also become global, and we have a global community within Reiki, I have been able to interact with and meet with people from all over the place who I may not have met in my life otherwise. And so that's another thing that I love about the practice is it really does get us in relationship, or the potential, the openness to be in relationship and build friendship with people that are far outside of our own personal little bubbles, you know.
Yep.
That has been another incredible gift of the practice and the system. But you also remind me of too, this conversation, I don't even know, but
Sorry,
I
y'all.
love
This is a
it.
long
I love
episode.
it.
Just roll with us.
Yeah,
Just
well, you just want to get a cup of tea. No, but you remind me of too, all of this is reminding me of the importance again of kind of where we started, of having that openness to get to know each other, be curious about each other, like don't make assumptions, right? So even another example of this in my life, there were two that are significant. One, I was married when I was 22, and the guy that I was married to, he was Persian. His family was from Iran, and when I tell you, I still to this day pray for like his life being the most incredible thing under the sun. I mean, one of the most loving, generous, kind people I've ever met in my life, and his family as well. But I was young and I was an asshole, really. I was 22 years old. I wasn't ready to be married. I was not, and so it didn't last long. But whenever I say that and people know the culture, there's this like, oh, this assumption of,
yeah,
oh, he must have been a terrible. Are you kidding me? One of
right.
the most incredible people, including his family, people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
Me. I was the asshole, right? So but it's interesting that that's the automatic assumption.
Right.
Like I had a problem with, maybe they were rigid or strict or all of the, no, they were the most incredible people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
But I
Just
also
are
had this
so loving
yes.
and big energy in
Oh,
in that space. And yeah, that stereotype of the rigidity, which
yeah.
it's just like there's a lot of ways of being that get expressed
Yeah.
inside of any culture. So
Yes. I mean, it's mind blowing to me that we live though from a lot of these projections and assumptions, and we see the consequence of that in so many ways, and yet we still do it. It's
yep.
like get to know people. My mom, when her and my stepdad retired, they moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and I was terrified because my ideas of the South, and they were moving from San Diego. I was like, oh, anyway, we go to Asheville. My mom is the kind of person, everyone is her friend. You're not going to meet her and her accept the fact that you don't love her and she's your friend, right? And so she would be friends literally with everyone. And it made me nervous in that environment because I was like, Mom, they might really hate you. Like, what do you? Ugh. And there was this old man who really was, I mean, he had his prejudices and things you could tell, but he also spoke to me with respect and all these things outside of my projection of who this person was going to be. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, so I hope that collectively and even through this expansion of spirituality, this surge, that more of us will become more open to getting to see and know each other beyond all these stories and boundaries that we've created and have been living from.
Absolutely. And to give ourselves those experiences of immersing in cultures that are different from ours,
Yeah.
whether or not we're moving to somewhere, but maybe, and being honest about what our experiences are,
Right.
if we really are in
Yeah.
a place that's not healthy for us, then we shouldn't be there. But
Right.
as you say, to resist the idea that it necessarily is going to be bad for me because of these things that I think I know about that place. My dad and stepmom, when they retired, moved to rural Pennsylvania, and I had a similar like, dude, you're a like liberal Berkeley academic, all the things. Like
Yeah.
you're moving to
Yeah.
rural Pennsylvania. And sure enough, they're extremely different from their neighbors and community in many ways, but they have fantastic friendships. And
Right.
when I go and visit them, they'll have a big barbecue. There'll be like 50 people there, and they're singing and having a good time. And at first I was like, how are you doing this? Like, because I haven't actually had the experience of living somewhere where I'm so culturally different.
Yeah.
I've always lived in the Bay Area, and then now just an hour from the Bay Area and a little bit less diverse, but still basically kind of liberal-ish college town.
Yeah.
So I've gotten those experiences through the internet and through, friendships that I've been able to cultivate that way. But it blew my mind the way that they built community and friendship. And, he's like, yeah, there's certain things we can't talk about. If we
Right.
want to talk politics, we want to talk religion, we got to call our California friends, call
Yeah.
you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And there's some people that they haven't been able to be friends with for those
Yeah.
reasons. But just to see them, build this community of love and of barn raising and of, um, just friendship from those basic human points of connection has been very inspiring to me.
Yeah.
I was a little ashamed of how surprised I was
Yeah.
they were able to.
But I mean, but what a beautiful thing though you see, because I think a lot of times we look from the lens of like other cultures or other people may inform us or teach us or be interesting to us and not consider that we're doing the same. Like I have a friend who, we're still we've been friends over 30 years, but because of our friendship, like she went to like um Black History Month parades, or like she had bean pies, and like she knows certain things that she wouldn't have necessarily known or been exposed to otherwise, And, as an adult, hearing her kind of point those things out, I was like, wow, because me being in it didn't even think about what she was being exposed to, only my version of what I was exposed to, right? So yeah, I think all of us can be I hope this inspires some people, Michaela. This is really why I love talking to you.
I do too, and I feel like that's really the place for us to land this bird,
Yeah.
and to really set the intention to continue the conversation. We
Yeah.
talked about the possibility of some kind of ongoing something like this
Yeah.
we get to share outward, and I do hope that we make that happen, because we obviously have a lot to say, and I think that these topics matter, and it matters to have these conversations with people who, on the one hand, we have a lot in common, on the other hand, we have a lot not in common. And so I
Right.
think that adds to the richness of the conversation. And, it's not lost on me that you and I have both positioned ourselves in a particular way that allows us to have these conversations. We both
Yes.
host a public facing platform where we intentionally invite people to explore these topics, and that matters. And so I thank you for doing that work and for being an energetic alchemist and creating space for other people to, get into the discomfort of being out of our comfort zone and to realize
Yes.
that we can make enough room for it so that it no longer feels so uncomfortable.
Yes. Oh, I hope we do too, because I know we didn't even talk about, I'm sure, many things you probably had planned, but
I didn't, and
I
I
could talk to
honestly,
you every day.
like I said, for this particular conversation, I had
Yeah.
very little planned. I wanted you to find energetic alchemy, and I wanted to see where it was going to go because I knew
Yeah.
that we would just roll it. And I love being able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And, where I wanted to end is just to simply invite you to share one thing that's bringing you joy these days. It can be like in this moment, it can be in your life generally, it could be teeny tiny, it can be big. But what's one thing that's bringing
Really,
you
honestly, it's this conversation.
joy?
Because just like you point out, I also host a podcast, and a lot of times the conversations are very driven by, people's body of work or what book they authored and these things, which, depending on who I'm conversing with, can be incredible. But sometimes people get very focused on this is the point of the conversation, so to speak. And so to be able to sit down and have this kind of conversation, and it really is like just talking to a friend. I recently got to speak to our teacher, Franz, in the very same way. I interviewed him just like, I'm going to talk to him like there's nobody here. Just what would I ask my teacher, you know?
Yeah,
I
totally.
appreciate these kinds of conversations where we just let our minds be open and free and just be authentic and whatever is, you know, true to our experience. So I'm thankful for you, for
Hmm.
the invitation, and for what else I know that we will work with in collaboration. So that's what I'm thankful for today.
Yeah, I'll join you in that. And something, back to the first conversation about energy being in a bit of a swirly place right now. I've been tracking a couple of different sets of kind of repeated symbols and like synchronicities that have been happening over this past month.
Yeah.
Just certain threads that keep popping up here and there. And I don't know exactly what they mean, but I'm in that question of like, okay, I keep seeing, hearing, like I keep encountering this symbol in these very synchronous ways over and over again. What does it mean? And one of them seems to be really directing me towards possibly going to a certain set of places. I'm a
Mm.
very homebody person, and traveling is something that I do a lot of travel in California, but outside of California is something that feels very, there's almost a belief that it's kind of almost impossible,
Yeah.
very, very, very difficult. And but I'm getting these pieces, and it's bringing me a lot of joy to notice, even if it turns into something unexpected or nothing at all, just to notice patterns, and to be in a state of being kind of aware and present enough in life to notice those patterns. And when you said North Carolina, that was North Carolina is one of the patterns that's been showing up. I'm supposed to go to North Carolina.
Wow.
So at least that's what I believe at this moment. So
Yes.
that feels really joyful to be able to notice that, and then to get to have these kind of little, it's like a little extra juicy point of connection, like, oh,
Yeah.
Yolanda gave me one.
Yes. Go to Asheville. Go to Asheville, the Blue
Yeah,
Ridge Mountains. Yeah.
Asheville, and there's a couple of different people that are dear to me who are in North Carolina, and it just never occurred to me to go visit them. And but there's something that wants to happen there, so
Wow.
I appreciate you adding a breadcrumb to that particular trail. So, friends listening, thank you so much for you going on this journey with us, for letting it be meandering, for letting it be a little bit directionless, but also very much in the vein of following threads. I hope that there has been something in this conversation for you, and that whatever that is, it nourishes your curiosity, it nourishes your energy, your imagination, and inspires you in some way. We would love to hear what that inspiration looks like for you. If you have any questions for either of us, we'd love to see them down below in the chat. There will be all of the links for how you can connect with this incredibly magical, amazing person that we've been in conversation with today, Ms. Yolanda Williams. All of that will be down in the description. And wherever your day takes you from here, may you be deeply provisioned for whatever comes your way. Thanks so much for being with us. We love you. Goodbye.
Thank you.